1950s Science Fiction Podcast, Season 3, Episode 5, Movie Review. It Came from Outer Space. Hello and welcome to my podcast show on 50 Sci-Fi. I hope that you are enjoying my podcast and will continue to listen to my show. I now have over 25 episodes published and continue to record new shows. Today's topic is the classic 1953 science fiction horror movie, It Came from Outer Space. This movie is a favorite of mine and holds a special place in my fandom. This was the first movie I saw on late night TV during the local horror host show. But I'll discuss more about that later. Now on to the movie. It Came from Outer Space was produced by William Atland, directed by Jack Arnold, and released by Universal Pictures. The movie was based on a script written by Ray Bradbury. However, the screenplay was written by Harry Essex. The runtime is 80 minutes and was made in black and white. The movie was released to the public June 5th, 1953. The movie is also presented in 3D at selected theaters. Two principal players are Richard Carlson as John Putman, who is an amateur astronomer. Barbara Rush is Ellen Fields, who is Putman's fiancée. And one supporting cast member is Russell Johnson, who plays a telephone lineman, Mike. Johnson is best known for playing the professor in Gilligan's Island TV show from the 60s. I mentioned him in a previous podcast on the movie This Island Earth. It starts with a meteor falling to Earth. The movie begins with what appears to be a meteor impacting the Earth and leaving a crater in the Arizona desert. The event is witnessed by Putnam and his fiancée, Ellen Fields, who just had a romantic dinner and started stargazing just as the object became visible. After watching the object crash, they both travel out to the crater and look at the meteor. Once there, Putnam sees an aperture or an opening of some kind, but a rock slide covers the side of the crater. Next morning, the site is swamped with the local sheriff and the media. Medium tells the sheriff what he saw, but he can't prove it. He starts to realize the object could be an alien spaceship. Strange things start happening around town. Putman is convinced that the alien ship of some kind has fallen to Earth and sets out to find evidence. While John and Ellen are headed home, John's car nearly hits a strange-looking object. John swerves and misses it, then stops to check the road. Putnam doesn't see anything blocking the road. He and Ellen are sure they saw something but don't know what to make of it. The next day, after visiting the crater, John and Ellen stop to chat with two telephone linemen, one of which is played by Russell Johnson. They know both of them, and John asks the lead lineman, Frank, if they've seen anything unusual. They both said no, but Frank tells John that they hear a strange noise coming from the lines. John is allowed to listen to the noise. Frank tells him it's the strangest thing he ever heard and that someone is tapping into the lines from either direction. Both John and Ellen leave the lineman and go back to town. On the way, they decide to stop and head back to talk to the lineman to see if has seen anything. As John pulls up to their truck, he notices that everything appears to be quite ordinary. However, upon closer inspection, he realizes that something might be amiss. The linemen are nowhere to be found, and they become concerned. Ellen becomes startled by a hand touching her back, and it turns out to be George, Russell Johnson. He assures them that everything is okay. When they ask about Frank, he tells them that he is fine. John and Ellen notice that George is behaving very strangely, talking unusually, and even looking up at the sun without blinking. While conversing with George, John notices a hand on the ground behind a nearby rock. Concerned it might belong to the murdered Frank, John cuts their conversation short and they head back to town. They stopped by the sheriff's office to report their experience and taken to the spot where they found the lineman. However, upon arrival, they discovered that the truck is gone and there's no evidence of a crime. Despite their explanation, the sheriff remains skeptical and they return to town. Ellen expresses her worry about George's odd behavior, particularly his unblinking stare at the sun. After dropping off the sheriff at his office, John spots Frank and George in town. He approaches them and offers his assistance. Frank assures John that his friends are safe and no one will be harmed unless they get involved. Although John wants to stop them, he ultimately allows them to continue. Ellen has been kidnapped. John and Ellen are asked to go to the sheriff's office that evening. Upon arriving, they meet the wife and the girlfriend of the lineman who had been talking to the sheriff. The women reported that the lineman's behavior was strange, as they refused to eat and claimed they would be working on a new project overnight, which would cause them to be away most of the time. After the women left with Ellen, Putnam stayed behind to discuss his beliefs about extraterrestrial visitors with the sheriff. Despite Putnam's claims that aliens can disguise themselves as humans, the sheriff remained skeptical until he received reports of theft from hardware stores and a missing scientist at the crash site. The sheriff and Putnam went to investigate. As Ellen was driving home from her meeting with the sheriff, she encountered Frank standing in the middle of the road. He got into the car and Ellen asked where he had been since he had been sought after. Ellen offered to take him home, but Frank declined, and instead requested that she drive him to the mine entrance. It was then that Ellen realized something was amiss, as Frank suddenly transformed into an alien. The sheriff and Putnam came back to the office empty-handed after searching for the missing scientist. They only found his vehicle and had no clue as to where his whereabouts. Suddenly, the phone rings, and the sheriff hands it over to Putnam. The caller informs Putnam that they have Ellen and they want to meet him alone at the abandoned mine. The sheriff and Putnam go to the desert and find themselves near the mine. John stays in the desert until he sees Ellen, who takes Putnam to the mine entrance and then disappears. John hears an alien's voice from the mine entrance and talks to it. The alien explains that they accidentally landed on Earth and are trying to fix their ship before leaving. Although the alien assures John that Ellen is safe and is being held hostage to ensure repairs are made. John remains suspicious. Putnam distrusts the alien and wants to see it, but when it appears from the mine shaft, he is terrified by its appearance. After encountering the alien being, John reunites with the sheriff and shares that the aliens accidentally crash landed on Earth and are planning to leave soon. However, the sheriff is skeptical and wants to take immediate action, but John persuades him that it would put Ellen and the others in danger. Eventually, the sheriff agrees to follow John's advice and wait it out. Putnam returned to the sheriff's office the next morning to report a break-in at his home. When he arrived, he discovered the door had been forced open and there was a trail of dust leading up to his closet. He soon realized the aliens had visited his house and stolen some of his clothing. Although the sheriff was patient, he was agitated about the situation. While the sheriff saw Frank walking down the street and wanted to detain him, Putnam objected to having him questioned, leading to an argument. Amid the argument, John stole the sheriff's gun, allowing Frank to escape. The aliens leave in a hurry. John hastily exits the sheriff's office, taking both the gun and his patrol car. Putnam rushes to the mine shaft to alert Ellen and the aliens. Meanwhile, the sheriff forms a posse. Yes, a good old-fashioned posse just right out of the westerns. And enlists men from the street and equips them with rifles so they can go find Frank. Roadblocks are set up to prevent Frank from reaching the mine. Eventually, Frank is spotted and attempts to bypass a roadblock. He is shot at and results in a fatal truck crash, and he is killed. As John reaches the mine entrance, he encounters an alien posing as Ellen. The alien accuses John of betraying their trust and failing to protect them. John explains that he tried to stop the sheriff and had come to the mine to warn them of the approaching posse. Ellen reveals that they had to resort to violence and uses a wand to demonstrate their power by firing a beam of light that destroys the surrounding rock. John takes cover and shoots back, killing the alien posing as Ellen. While searching for the real Ellen, John hears some noise coming from a nearby tunnel. When he investigates, he discovers the rest of the aliens working on their spaceship. They are all in human form and are shocked and amazed that he found their location. John approaches the John approaches John approaches the leader, who is taken on the form of John Putnam himself. The leader tells John that they have been working over 1,000 years to make space travel possible for their beings. He would rather destroy themselves and the ship than fall into the hands of the sheriff's posse, who are waiting just outside the mine entrance for any signs of the aliens to emerge. Putnam successfully convinces the alien leader to maintain hope and assures them that he can prevent any attacks from the entering mob. He secures the release of the hostages and escorts them out of the ship, starting with Ellen. Putnam ensures that all those who are captured are safely let out of the mine. As they exit, he has the mine entrance destroyed to prevent any further entries or exits. The group reunites with the sheriff's posse and witnesses the alien ship take off from the crater with a large explosion. Ellen inquires if they will return, to which John responds that it would be a long while before they do, as humanity is not yet prepared to face them.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Richard Carlson. I'm sure you'd all like to know something about the new entertainment miracle, Third Dimension. What it is, what it does. Well, the best way I can describe it to you is to tell you that it makes the screen absolutely real and alive. People, objects, landscapes take on a depth and a dimension such as they have in real life. And it has an added quality. Objects actually seem to come out of the screen. So real they almost touch you, creating the most dramatic impact that the screen has ever known. Coming to an incredible climax when a molten meteoric spaceship from another planet rushes out of the heavens right at you. Of course, these illustrations are only a pale suggestion of the real thing. It can't be described, it's got to be seen and experienced. And I must add that even without 3D, It Came from Outer Space is a picture that you'll long remember for its blending of science and fiction, for its eerie terror, and for its story of an invasion from another planet that's almost beyond imagining. I tell you, from its size and its appearance, this thing came from outer space. I even have reason to believe that there's some form of life in it. What do you want? What are you doing? Let me see you as you really are.
My thoughts. This science fiction movie from the 1950s is one of the best. I believe it deserves a grade A rating, if not an A minus. The movie has an excellent storyline and touches on social issues of the time through its dialogue. One of the reasons why it's so appealing is because it plays on the fear of communist invasion and foreign agents posing as regular citizens. These types of sci-fi movies were popular during the Cold War, much like how zombie stories are popular today. As a child, I enjoyed watching this movie on late-night television. The visual and audio effects were particularly impressive to me. Although I have not watched it in 3D, I have learned that the ship crash sequence utilizes this technology. The producers also used more simple effects creatively, such as the theremin to add a creepy vibe whenever the aliens appeared, and camera effect to show things from the aliens' point of view. However, the scene that stands out the most to me is when the lineman discussed the noise in the phone lines. It made me, at just 10 years old, believe that monsters were lurking somewhere in the desert, which it turns out there were. As I mentioned earlier in the show, Shock Theater was a locally produced program from a TV station I used to watch. It was common for TV stations to create their shows between network programs in the 60s and the 70s. The show was hosted by Dr. Shock, played by Tommy Reynolds, who worked for WTVC Channel 9, broadcasting from Chattanooga, Tennessee. Dr. Shock played a vampire in a black cape and wearing a white shirt and carried a scepter with a skull on it. He interacted with his sidekick, a vampire bat named Dingbat, who was actually a puppet. Before introducing a movie, Dr. Shock would speak in an otherly world voice, while Dingbat provided comic relief. Through Shock Theater, I discovered classic sci-fi horror movies such as The Blob, It Came, The Terror from Beyond Space, and The Quartermass Experiment, as well as the aforementioned movie It Came from Outer Space. Watching these movies on a late night on Saturday evening with the lights turned low and when my parents were asleep was a lot of fun. As we reach the end of today's program, I'd like to give a special shout out to Tennessee Macabre. This streaming TV show pays homage to the classic horror host shows of the past, but with a modern twist of internet streaming. The show is hosted by Deke and Grim, who add their unique humor to the program. They feature some fantastic sci-fi and horror movies from the 50s, including The House on Haunted Hill, The Giant Yia Monster, and The Tingler. Although it's been some time since I last watched their show, I still believe it's excellent and highly recommended checking it out. If you're interested in learning more about Deacon Grimm, please visit their website, TennesseeMacabre.com, and follow them on Twitter at TennesseeMacabre1. They would be delighted to hear from you. Thank you for tuning in to this episode. I hope you found it enjoyable. I will be back with a new episode soon. Your feedback and support would be greatly appreciated. For updates on my social media, please visit my Linktree profile at EG/1985. You can also email me at utcgrad97@gmail.com. That's spelled UTCGRAD97 at gmail.com. Once again, thank you for listening.